What's up, beautiful people? Welcome back to the Baird Show. In today's episode, we have someone very special. He was arguably the most impactful teacher on my entire school career, and he just really made a huge difference with me. So it's really, really special that I get to sit down and talk to him today. And yeah, so without any further ado, Michael Sharpe.
See somebody.
Don't mind that. That was just to like sync some stuff up. But yeah.
It was a Kid Street clap. I don't know if you know that reference, but
No, that was over my head.
yeah.
I mean, first of all, I just wanted to thank you for actually agreeing to do this. Believe it or not, I've wanted to have you on the podcast for a really long time.
Okay, well, hopefully I don't disappoint.
Yeah, it had been a while since I wanted to do this, mainly because like ever since I'd had you as a teacher, you were always like encouraging your students to think outside of just what they were being told in a way that you would teach like while leaving room for kids to think on their own. And that was something that had always been like that set you apart from everyone. And I had always thought you'd be an interesting guest. So
thanks.
It's kind of cool to have you here finally. You were actually top 3 of people I wanted to get in my podcast, but like obviously you're not quite Beyonce, so we'll have to we'll have to make do. But
have you been doing the podcast? Like, is this something you've been doing on your own? I know this is part of a school project right now.
Yeah, I've been trying. Over 2020, I've made I think like 14 or 15 episodes or so, but just with myself. There's one other with a guest, and that's with my sister. But yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So thanks for sending a couple of those questions. It helped me just kind of collect my thoughts and get a sense of where the conversation might go. So that's helpful.
Oh yeah, no worries. Well, yeah, I guess now that I've buttered you up, we should start the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, like, one of the things that I'd always wanted to know is ever since you were teaching about sustainability and like that course was everything from like economics to gardening, like it had so much content.
Yeah.
But one of the things that it left me with is almost like a skeptic view of these big, grand, like, let's save the planet movements. And I guess the main reason for that was the fact that they all seem so big and unreachable. Like no one's going to stop driving their car for something that they can't like see in front of them. That's not a physical thing, because it's less convenient than taking a bus or something like that, even though it would be a better alternative. And so I started thinking about like the people that are doing things right and the people that are they're doing what they're supposed to. And you came to mind, and I just wanted to ask you a bit more about your life specifically and how, like, what are some of the things that you've started to do or you've done to try and live a more sustainable life?
Yeah, and it's I like the way you frame it too, like the idea of doing what we're supposed to be doing, because it is sort of like it's the choices that we make are based on our values, and they're based on the idea that what we do has consequences for our communities, our environment, and it's important that we try to make choices that are as respectful as possible about of the communities and of our environment. And part of the problem that I have with that at times, and again, it's this skepticism that underlies everything I do. And I remember like going back to when we were having the sustainability club and then later the class, with We Day coming up and, not wanting to participate in that. And then now with all of the controversies around We Day that came up this year, it's like, oh yeah, that was well-founded.
Yeah.
But the choices that I get to make are choices that come from being in a position of privilege. And they're not choices that everyone, unfortunately, is able to make. So when I think about the types of things that I do that are more sustainable, whether it's, choosing organic produce or fair trade products at the supermarket, shopping locally at local bakeries, local grocery stores, those are choices that come from economic privilege, being able to afford to make these choices. And there are a lot of people in our communities that simply don't have that luxury. And so when it comes to sustainability and the individual choices we all make, it's good to talk about the why and the how and what we can all be doing, but it's also, we have to be careful. And I find myself being more and more careful because it can quickly become this idea of keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
And right now, with my life and the way everything is structured, and I don't know if you know, but with us at Van B, I teach typically at École Van Bellingham. That's where I had you in grade 7 and 8.
Yeah.
But we have now been pushed out to Island Lakes Community School as sort of like this sort of Van B satellite campus, which has given me quite a long commute, and I'm no longer able to take the bus, which is something that I enjoy doing.
Right.
But just because of the reality of getting from point A to point B and when I need to be here, it's just not a reality. So all the choices we make are important, but I think we have to keep in mind that we can't sort of project that onto anyone else, because everyone is making choices based on their own abilities, their own reality, what they can afford to do and what they need to do. And I think you talked about, car ownership and how much we drive and where we drive and what type of vehicle we drive. It'd be wonderful if we could all afford a Tesla, and take all those fuel emissions and carbon emissions out of the air. But the reality right now is just that's not within the realm of possibility for most people.
That's a bit out of reach. Yeah.
It's a bit out of reach, absolutely. So I think, like, personally, I do things like, we just don't consume much. I don't buy a lot of things. If I do go out and purchase, whether it's toys for Christmas for my daughters, we just went on Kijiji and found a bunch of fun, reusable stuff that she's just absolutely loving, rather than buying new. When it comes to clothing, 90% of my wardrobe over the last 20 years has come from, a Goodwill or a Value Village. So buying secondhand and, not feeling that that's, somehow a lesser thing, but for me, it's actually a point of pride. Like that's where I go and find my clothing.
Well, because it would like make you feel like you're making a difference, right?
Exactly. And it's because it's in line with the values. And so I guess when I was teaching the course, one thing that I was trying to that, really think about what are your values, what's important to you, what do you think you can achieve, and just start there. When it comes to, if we're trying to live sustainable lifestyles, we have to start with those little things that we are able to do and be mindful of the things that we'd like to do, but we can't. And especially when it comes to students, students don't have a lot of control over how they live, where they live, how they get from point A to point B. That's, something that's still in
Out of their hands. Yeah.
out of their hands. So it's another thing, like, I believe very strongly in, dense communities, walkable communities, that allow for people to not have to rely on, big, clunky vehicles to get around and do their shopping. And, yet I teach in suburban communities that are built to accommodate the car.
Right.
So I have to be careful about, how I frame discussions about livability, and, when I criticize 3,000 square foot homes, et cetera, I have to keep in mind that many of my students live in 3,000 square foot homes. And those are all just realities that I think we all have to come to terms with over time and do the best that we can, I suppose. And I'm hopeful that, some of my students, when they go on to university and have different life experiences, might see the value in living in, older inner city neighborhoods and might, you know, migrate into those communities that I feel are more sustainable than, ex-urban or suburban communities around the rings of cities.
Right. And I mean, one of the points you had made is with all of these choices that you can make, a lot of the like conscious consumerism and that type of thing, like a lot of those like choices where you're trying to do better come with a certain level of privilege.
Absolutely. It's a
So,
lot of these decisions are out of reach for people. And frankly, if you're struggling to feed your family or to find work, you shouldn't be worrying about, the sourcing of your eggs or meat. That's just not a priority for that.
right.
Yeah.
And so in that way you had said that you consider yourself like privileged enough to be able to choose the like ideals that fit your values. Would you say, or like, what was it that made you decide to be choosy about these things? Like, what was it that like just flipped the switch that you're like, I should be catering this to how I want to live instead of just following everybody else?
Travel, absolutely travel. Having the lived experience of being in communities and places where that sort of lifestyle is taken for granted. And that sort of lifestyle is um, more the mainstream than, on the fringe, maybe. So,
Right.
living in European communities and working in European communities, like I had the privilege of doing when I was in my 20s, showed me that, there are different ways of living, and having that experience, for me, that was preferable. It gave me a better quality of life. And that really opened the door to looking into, well, what else could I be doing that might be different and that might be more sustainable? And then, as I started off in teaching, took a bunch of courses in education for sustainability, and not just with the coursework that we were doing, but just being exposed to a lot of like-minded teachers from around the province that were taking those courses, and hearing about what they've been doing. Uh, it's the thing with these types of communities is when you get in and you start to meet people who are, I think, who adhere a lot more closely to the tenets of sustainability than I do, even by a long shot. You learn a lot from them, and then it sort of drives you to want to learn more every time that you're exposed to something new. At least for me, anyways.
Right. And obviously, another thing you'd mentioned is this hasn't been like an overnight thing. You've been working towards this, and I don't know if you consider yourself, you probably still are, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And if anything, not just due to the pandemic, but my family situation changing, is my lifestyle right now is probably a little bit less sustainable than what it was 5 years ago,
Right.
in terms of the amount of movement around the city that I do drive in a car, et cetera. But that's not just like, I think it's a constant theme. You don't just get to a point where you're like, oh, I'm living a sustainable lifestyle, I'm good.
Yeah.
It's constant. It's in the choices that you make every day. And I think just making each of us aware of what those choices are is really important. And I know, like for me, I'll still go from time to time to resources like the Green Action Center or the Manitoba Eco Network, and just pop into their websites to see what they're doing, because those are resources that we have in our community that are super helpful. And especially as a teacher, the Green Action Center is they're based out of downtown in the MEC building. I don't know if you've ever been to Mountain Equipment Co-op on Portage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have their offices there, but they run all sorts of, composting programs. They do education for schools to improve, their transportation plans, to encourage kids to, bike and walk and roll to school. They're just an incredible resource, not just for teachers, but for anyone who's interested in getting into more sustainable lifestyle practices.
And with it, like with this commitment to sustainability you've made, uh, have you found that through like over the years it's become more difficult to keep up with as there's more like hidden, almost like hidden people. Like when you check like click on like the same day delivery on Amazon, you don't see a lot of what goes on. So to be conscious and to make choices based on like your morals and values, have you found it to be more difficult when there's more almost, yeah, like almost hidden people and like
I, you know,
processes you don't see necessarily?
yeah, I don't know if it's gotten more difficult. I think it's always been difficult. The hidden costs, and there are hidden costs in everything. Like, I mean, you mentioned, Amazon same day delivery, or whether it's skip the dishes, um, whether we're talking about just, getting cheap underwear at Superstore. Um, they all seem great, that we have this at our fingertips, and it's great that we have access to affordable clothing and all these things, but there are hidden costs as well
Right.
that we don't see up front. And I think you alluded to this at the beginning. It's hard to convince someone to
Give
take the
up
bump
that.
and give up the convenience of their lifestyle when the true cost of the choices they're making are totally hidden from you. You have to dig really deep to find them, and yeah, that's really tricky. It's funny with when it comes to climate change. I feel like the problem is pretty simple to understand.
The
It's
solutions,
pretty
the
obvious
kicker.
that we've got a problem here.
Yeah.
But then when you get to, okay, we've got a problem, how do we solve it? Those solutions are really complex.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
and
mean, not only complex, but not necessarily like, not everyone's going to want to adapt because they're losing the convenience of their cheap underwear at Superstore.
exactly. It's funny. I'm just sticking on I don't know why I brought up the underwear example, but like, underwear and socks are the only items of clothing that I don't buy used.
That's a
And
good policy.
it's a good policy. And mitts, because I value mitts. I don't have great circulation. I need good warm mitts. Anyways, I'm like, okay, well, what would it cost to, rather than getting, Joe underwear that's been produced in very questionable facilities in Bangladesh or something, let's look into some really good quality underwear. And I went to a local shop in my neighborhood. I found a pair of underwear that was $60. It was $60.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sure it was a great pair of underwear, but it wasn't even a two pack. It was one pair of underwear was $60. And so that's kind of the issue where, I mentioned that point of privilege where people get priced out of sustainable choices. That was me priced out of a sustainable choice. Maybe there are some people that can just go, okay, whatever,
Yeah.
I'll pay bucks, no big deal. But I'm not in that position. So it's tricky. And really my beliefs on sustainability, they've shifted a bit over the years. I definitely believe, and I still believe in individual responsibility, conscious consumerism, making choices that support local, that support sustainably sourced, whatever it is. But I think that if we're going to actually, tackle climate change, it has to be in ways that are addressed at an institutional level. It's got to be, political, and if we're going to have systemic change, it's got to start at a political level. We have to change our laws, we have to change our regulations, and there's been a bit of that. There's been some progress, with carbon pricing, the carbon tax that the liberals are rolling out, whether it's, better emission standards for cars, et cetera. We just need a lot more of that and a lot quicker than what's being done right now.
And I mean, there's a lot to do. And realistically, if we like were to implement all of these things, there's still so many inefficiencies that we wouldn't necessarily be able to fix, and a whole bunch of problems that have already gone too far to repair. So I feel like the whole like stop climate change, I don't know, is entirely possible. Definitely slow it down would be more accurate, I think. Because at
Yeah,
our current rate of progress, we're moving too fast in the wrong direction.
yeah, yeah. And I agree with that. But we can't be defeatist about it. We
Right.
just hopefully it'll become more and more evident. Before everything took a really sharp turn in March with the pandemic, there were some really great events that were occurring last year. There was the rally in September that was held at the legislative buildings. I was able to go with a group of students, and it seems like that was a lifetime ago. But I can't remember how many tens of thousands of kids and community members showed up to that rally. It was really inspiring and encouraging. It's too bad. I feel like once we pull through this pandemic, it's going to take a lot of work just to get back to that same level of community activism and getting that same enthusiasm back for the issue, because everyone's going to be picking up the pieces for a while.
Right. And it's going to be a lot of just trying to get used to being out of the house, as well as like
Yeah,
people are just going to want to live in the conveniences they were missing. Like people are going to want to go to restaurants a bunch and yeah, like fast food
absolutely.
with questionable sourcing and all that.
And the other issue is, I just lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry.
Public transportation is like, there are a lot of places where public transport is seen as a viable choice for anyone. So you get people in business suits, people across the entire spectrum of classes, and just diverse ridership in
Right.
public transport. That's not the case in Winnipeg. It
No,
never
not
has.
at all. It's all students.
Yeah, it's all students and people that can't afford a car. I mean, there are few people in Winnipeg that take public transport as a choice. Um, and with the pandemic and the realities of the pandemic, ridership has just plummeted.
Like,
And
I know I've certainly been taking the bus less because I mean, you see the odd person get on without a mask and you're like,
no, right.
no, thanks.
Yeah, and I mean, it's hard to social distance in a bus.
It is.
It is. It's not a reality. And so like I'm really worried. And because also like, in a city like Winnipeg that's spread out geographically, we need a viable system of public transportation to tackle, the effect or the impact of cars in our city. And I think it's going to be a long time before public transportation catches up even to where it was, and where it wasn't great to begin with. So I
Right.
think that I'm worried about is one of the long-term effects of the pandemic.
And I mean, that's also going to take like to get more, either more buses or in the future at some point, some kind of light rail or something. That's going to take a ton of money and a ton of work and a ton of interest, which as it stood before, there wasn't a ton of interest. So after the
And
pandemic, it's,
yes, now, yeah.
yeah, not
So
looking great.
that no, I'd have to agree with that. It's not looking great. Yeah. I mean, although not to put too much of a downer on the conversation. Um, there have been some silver linings to the pandemic, and I don't know if it's a stretch to frame this within the conversation of sustainability, but I know within my neighborhood with community center programming and organized sports and all those things being put on hold, I've seen so many community members reclaim waterways, and in here in Island Lakes, it's the retention ponds,
Right.
and seeing people find ways to be active and engaged in their own backyards. It's been pretty refreshing. I live just off the Assiniboine River, and it's a winter wonderland down there. It's like those old winter folk paintings that you see of, just hundreds of people skiing, skating, snowball fights,
Right.
bonfires. I know
And
there's a safety issue, but
what
you
can
know,
you do, really?
you do. And I think honestly, the safety issue can be addressed as well. And I know that in my community, I know a few, people who have places on the river. They go out, they put an auger down, they test the thickness, so that there's, it's not just totally
Arbitrary.
arbitrary. It's, people are making choices about safety too. Like I wouldn't take my girls down on the river if I didn't think it was safe.
Right. And I mean, I've been skating on the like river trail a couple times, and they bring like, I don't know if it's a Zamboni or what they use, but they have some kind of machine that they drive along the ice.
It's a Zamboni. So they auger so whenever the Zamboni runs out of water, they have a watering truck too, but they auger it, fill it with river water,
Oh, that's
and
cool.
they use it to flood it. And it also, that particular Zamboni that the Forks uses runs on vegetable oil.
Yeah, I had heard that. Wasn't the Forks one of the first, or like I don't know if they are the first or they're still trying to become completely like zero?
Yeah, they've been, I mean, for years, they've been trying to be waste free. They've had, successes, they've had failures, as with anyone trying something new. But yeah, the Forks has been, I think, pretty progressive about their attempts to make choices to make their practices sustainable. And, whether it's, glasses and plates and stuff that are reusable now the common, they make a lot of good choices there.
They're geothermal as well, are they not? I
Yeah, I don't
think
know if
so.
it powers everything, but they do have a geothermal field in that South Point area, just across that bridge is where
Right.
I believe it is. Yeah. Yeah. Not to be confused with South Point, the neighborhood out by the Brady Road landfill.
Right.
Uh, I think South Point is the name of that little point of land uh, between the Reds and the Assiniboine and Main Street, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. One thing that uh like this whole thing can seem kind of daunting to try and start something that's this big and is going to be a continuing project for a large part of your life. What would you say would have been, or like, where's a good place to start? What would you recommend if you're trying to be more sustainable and trying to do better? Obviously, you can't like put out a blanket statement, just don't buy stuff, because that's not realistic. But like, where would you say overall would be a good place to start?
Yeah, that's such a good question. When I was a kid, it was very much like I would, ban Walmart. I'm never going to shop at Walmart because, I disagree with their practice, that sort of thing. And I just don't think that's fair to most people. And I don't think that's going to be a solution that's going to work for the majority of population. So where to start? I think where to start is just educating yourself however you can. And sometimes it's hard to know where to look. So I think I brought up the Green Action Center earlier. Especially for us locally, it's good to have local solutions. And the folks at the Green Action Center, I think their website's really good. I find it easy to browse. I think they've got it well organized. So if I'm thinking about, how do I improve my garden at home, or how do I, my composting's not working right now, what do I do? The Green Action Center has really good resources to go on there quickly. And so I definitely recommend anyone in Winnipeg to go and look at what they're talking about and what their priorities are.
I will find that and leave a link in the like bio for this video.
I think even I'm not sure about this, but I feel like they're under threat a little bit because the current government is pulling back on their funding, which would be an absolute shame because they do so much in the community. So I'll have to look into that to see. It would be such a shame to lose a resource like the Green Action Center.
Right. And I remember you bringing that up within our sustainability course more than once
Well, and
with
I've had them
various things.
they come out to schools, they do presentations. They're really helpful. Yeah, where to start? I guess just think about, you know, I guess you could do a bit of a brainstorm just within your own life. What are your habits? What are your practices? What do you do that you might question and say, well, maybe this isn't
The
the
best way to do
best
it?
way of doing it, and what other options might I have? And just having that sort of reckoning with yourself to decide what kind of changes you might be able to make and where can you start. I know for myself personally, the long-term goal for me is I need to be working at a school that's closer to home.
Right.
That's by far the biggest part of my life that doesn't jive with my values of sustainability. And I'm being a little bit, I don't know. Right now, I'm not making any changes. One, I love the community that I'm in. I really appreciate my colleagues. It's a great school to be working at, and I'm very aware of that. And I'm not in a hurry to change that.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm also aware of the fact that the government is going to come out with an education review eventually. It was supposed to come out in the spring, and because of COVID,
It
it hasn't.
didn't. Yeah.
It did. But my expectation is when that review does come out, we're going to see amalgamations between divisions. And this
Okay.
get into a little bit of the technicalities of being a teacher in the province, but we get seniority based on our school division employment. So if I were to change divisions, start over, say, in the Winnipeg School Division, then I'd have issues with seniority. It doesn't affect pay or anything like that, but it is something to consider if you're worried about, whether the current government is going to cut on teachers' jobs, et cetera. If there's amalgamation and it's all one school division for the city, for example, then there'll be a little bit, one of the positives of that scenario. And it's
You'd,
not all positive,
you'd
but
keep your seniority when you
I
move,
could keep
right?
my seniority and have more options about, where I could look for work. So that's one thing I'm kind of just sitting on and waiting and seeing.
Just waiting.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think to be the best teacher you can be, you have to understand your community. And I think it takes
Time for sure.
it takes time to I always have a lot of empathy for principals because they get moved around. And I've seen, principals start off with really good administrators who have just a hell of a time in their first couple of years because they haven't gotten to know the community yet, and the community hasn't gotten to know them. And that takes time. So I don't like the idea of popping between schools too often.
Right. Yeah, I guess I don't know how to follow up with it.
Well,
That's
it's a little
pretty
off
good.
topic too.
Yeah, that's fair. Just another thing that I was like wondering about, because I mean, I just went through my sustainability notes from the course, and I remembered you'd even been talking about, like, when you first moved to Van B, how you never had really been the type to stay at one place forever. You're never going to do that, and you had even said that. Um, so do you think that once you have like a small basis of like a small sustainable life set up with like your local grocery stores and like that kind of thing, do you think you should always still be looking for better? Do you think you should like be looking at that, or do you think you should just keep that aside and try and improve other areas?
That's a great question. I think, for example, I don't like to, like I said or before, I like to keep moving, keep doing new experiences are super important. That being said, the community that I live in, I don't have any intentions of moving out of that community
Okay.
because it's got everything that I want. There's little tiny local restaurants on, community streets. There's, a bunch of little corner stores I can walk to. There's bakeries, it's just, for me, it's the ideal neighborhood. I love it.
Everything's close and local and
Everything's close and local. So for example, I live in Wolseley, and last night, I've got my daughter who's 4 years old, goes to the home daycare across the street. We go and grab her, and with my other daughter who's 6 months old, Rose, and we walk down to the river.
congratulations.
Yeah,
That's
I didn't think that. Yeah, she's a little sweetheart. She had her 6-month checkup yesterday, and she is a butterball. She's weighs a full pound more than Hazel did when at the same age. But yeah, we were able to go down as a family, go down to the Assiniboine River. There is, and it's not the Red River skating trail that's maintained by the Forks. It's a community of shovelers and neighbors who have shoveled a skating trail. I don't know how many kilometers it is, but it runs the entire neighborhood.
Oh, cool.
On the Assiniboine River, there are just countless little skating rinks. Everyone's taken their Christmas trees
And
and
put them along the edge.
down along the bank to decorate it. There people have run power down to the river with extension cords. And they've got, some of the Christmas trees are lit. There's bonfires
Oh, that's
every couple
really
hundred.
cool.
Somebody's even painted curling rings
Oh,
and
wow.
created these homemade curling rocks out of, log cutouts and, plumbing handles for turning faucets on and off.
Yeah.
There's a little mini curling rink that's set up. It's just unbelievable. And seeing the amount of community pride that's taking place down there, it's amazing. And then we come up and we go by the community center. They've got their two ODRs. There's a little kids rink there as well. It's just got everything that you want for living that kind of local, walkable lifestyle. So
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
yeah, so I think coming back to like, do you stick with the things that work? I think so.
Yeah.
I think that I'll stick with that. And then, like I mentioned before, where I need to, find more sustainable practices is, where do I work? How do I get to work? That sort of thing. And I think a lot of the things that feel like sacrifices at first. So, coming back to, giving up that vehicle and being able to drive and get to and from work in 20 minutes when the bus is going to take you 40 minutes, in that sort of example. I find some of those sacrifices end up adding to your quality of life in the long run, and you start to appreciate them. And I know for myself, taking the bus, for example, was a wonderful way of just relaxing at the end of the day. If you're driving, you're still switched on, you're still making choices. You don't have as much time between, professional life, private life. Whereas if you take the bus, you grab a book, you put a podcast on, you listen to music, you
It
look out the
gives
window.
it
It
gives
just
you like a transition.
and it gives you a transition. And I find that I miss that a lot. And even then, like, if you transfer, you get out and you get to spend a part of your day in a different neighborhood where you might not, and depending on what you want to do while you're there. So there are things that I loved about busing. If you end up riding your bike, there are sacrifices there, in terms of you might have to leave earlier, you might have to bring a change of clothes and all that. But the well-being you get from that that activity could turn out to be something that you didn't know that you needed, but turned out to be really important to you.
Right.
So I think, when we think about sacrifices, one thing that we can do to try to sell those sacrifices is to, say that what seems like a sacrifice can turn out to be a really good thing. So.
And with that, have you like through all of this, because you've made this commitment to sustainability, have you found or felt like you've missed out on anything because of this? Do you feel like you wish you would have been able to do something that you weren't able to because of this?
No, but I'd say that with a caveat, just because I'm flexible in my commitment. Like,
Okay.
I don't know. I think if there was something I really, really wanted to do, I'm not Greta. Greta took a boat across the Atlantic, to prove a point and to live by her very high standards of sustainability.
Right.
When I had a chance, I think it was, you would have been in my class that year. I left for Europe for 6 weeks
Right.
with my wife and daughter because I could, and because it was something that I really wanted to experience. So we went and lived in Spain for a while. Flying halfway across the world, in a jet plane, and then the type of travel that you're doing that's
No,
not a sustainable choice, right? But that's a choice where quality of life and the experience of it kind of, in my mind, for me, outweighed those concerns about, is this the best choice for sustainability? So
one thing I mean that I've kind of been picking up all along here is there's both good and bad, but you have to find like the middle ground and you have to find the moderation.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you can't, I don't know, I can't live all the time worried about every single decision I make.
Right. That's not
That's not
practical.
sustainable for me. It's not practical. So I think that I think you have to try to find ways that, lifestyle choices that are going to stick. because it's something that you enjoy and you really value and works for you. And if it's not going to stick, then it's not sustainable, right? Sustainability has to be sustainable in practical terms too, right? So just living off, I could go and try to start a commune, outside the city, and I have friends who've done that and who can do it.
Right.
I can't see myself being able to do that because of my personality, my skill sets, it's just, I'm not that far down that path of this is how I want to live.
Yeah. I guess, like, really the last question I had for you is, out of everything that we've talked about, all of like everything we've talked about, what would you say would be like a one key takeaway? Like, what would be the one thing that you would like everyone to remember from this?
Um, I guess question your own practices and question whether what you're doing aligns with your values. Because I think a lot of what we do, on a just out of habit, I think that we don't necessarily consider, what are the real impacts of that? And try to dig into that if you can.
So to just be inquisitive about what you do.
Yeah, really can like think about what you do and why you're doing it. And if there's something that you could be doing better. I mean, and that's relates to sustainability, but really I think that we should all be questioning what we're doing all the time. I think we have to be more aware of the impacts of our choices.
Right.
The way that we're treating people or the language we use. I think that it's good to be constantly reevaluating that.
Yeah, I guess that really can't hurt to just always be trying to do better and like thinking about what you could do better. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's key, because that's how you avoid getting stuck in a rut. And I think also if you're open to the idea that you could always be doing something better, I think you're also open to the idea that the way that somebody else is doing something,
may not be the right way.
And might be the right way, and you're less likely to judge others because they're doing something differently. And I think that we can use a lot of that, because right now it's quite easy to judge others. Not to get into political things, but like, I think we have to be more open-minded to the opposite end of the spectrum of whatever our values are, to try to understand it better.
Because, well, really, how can you understand your own values if you don't understand like the alternatives? Because then you'd end up like shut in to just what you think.
Yep. And there are too many of us like that right now, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, that's pretty much all I had for you. It was nice talking to you again.
And the email chain is starting to grow, so I should probably
Okay,
some of these and get going.
Yeah, it was
But
nice talking to you. Thanks so much for talking to me today. It was
no, thanks
great.
for reaching
Thank
out.
you.
I really appreciate it. I enjoyed it. So yeah, if you feel like reaching out again, absolutely, be a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
All right, take care.
Bye.